Good. Well, I want to welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Alan Kearns. I'm glad to have you as part of our series, our CareerClass series with York University. It's great to have a great turnout for today's webinar. It's awesome to see so many people interested in this topic and thinking about your career and thinking about your options. And I'll be leading today's webinar. My name is Alan Kearns, and we're really fortunate to have a great partner with York and the different ways that we've supported York along the journey, thinking about different elements around leading and managing your career. And this is part of our alumni career class series, the whole idea of raising literacy, raising your literacy rate. You all went to York, obviously, to raise your literacy rate, and this is to continue that journey with you more from a leadership and management. So today's webinar is going to be our career class on leadership starts with you, and in the sense, why should I follow you? And so I want to welcome you all. A couple of quick things as we get started today. You'll notice that we've muted everyone. The reason we do that is because we get lots of different ways of people joining us, and you get lots of background noise, and it can quite distracting. So we're just muting everyone. But also there are ways to participate in today's webinar. One of the ways is with hands up. So do you want to give me a hands up to make sure that you can hear me well and have a sense around that? So just give me a hands up around that. That's awesome. Okay, great. The other thing is just take a minute to introduce yourself and where you're joining us from. So you'll find that there is a question box there, and that's a great way to ask questions and make comments along today's career class. So feel free to introduce yourself and where you're joining us from, and that would, again, help us with getting a bit of a sense of who's joining us and where you're joining us from. We'll see how far we can go across the country. We'll just mention where you're joining us from, your name and where you're joining us from. That'd be great. So let's see how far we're going today. All right, we got Baltimore, we got Vancouver, awesome. We got all right, let's see how far we go. Great. Okay. We got Calgary, awesome. We got lots of stuff going in Calgary, Peterborough, Burlington, Guelph, welcome Guelph, welcome Shannon, Toronto. Welcome Jacksonville, Florida. Who wouldn't want to be in Jacksonville, Florida today? Who wouldn't want to be in Jacksonville, Florida the last month? Never mind today. Welcome you. Toronto again, Oakville, we're represented, and then joining us from Toronto, great. We have Halifax joining us from Halifax, that's awesome. Great, we've got Houston, awesome, we want to welcome Houston. Though we should be saying something about NASA there, Houston, we want to welcome you. And awesome, we also have Edmonton, we want to welcome Edmonton as well. Terrific. A couple of quick things as we get started today. How many of you are on LinkedIn? Put up your hands, those of you that are on LinkedIn. All right, a number of you are. I'm going to send you a way to connect with me. I always say one of the key things is leaders really know that your network is your net worth. It's one of the key things that leaders do really, really well is they understand, particularly as you, the sooner you do it, the better it is, and that's actually one of the big benefits of being in an alumni group is you have the opportunity of networking, connecting, communicating with a group of people with fellow interests. So feel free to follow me on Twitter, and also you can feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I've also given you my email address if you have any specific questions or comments you have after the webinar. Happy to address those, so feel free to address that with me. A little bit about my background. I'm the founder and head coach of CareerJoy and also the author of Get the Right Job Right Now. And I have been working over the last 20-odd years now working with professionals and organizations helping to deal with transition. And really, leadership is managing and leading change. Essentially, if you want to narrow it down to what really good leadership is managing and leading change. I myself made a major transition in my background. I was a executive recruiter for a number of years, so I've seen sort of the reality of people being moved out and seeing what happens there. And CareerJoy now is in the business of really helping to make work better. That's our goal, and we do that through a couple of different areas. We do it through career transition support, so restructuring, outplacement, career transition services. We also do it with leadership development. So we work with a number of corporate clients across the country in different sectors, helping to deal with leadership transition. And so today I'm going to be sharing with you sort of best practice that I've seen from the real world in dealing with a broad spectrum of people and managing this. So obviously you're coming here because you've got some questions on how to be a more effective leader and what that looks like. And to me, that's fundamentally what we're going to be addressing today is how to do that and how to be smarter about this and how to think through this. You know, it's interesting in dealing with the number of different corporate clients we have across the country. One of the things that I've seen is that really at the end of the day, the content's very specific. So whether you're in the people moving business like Otis is, moving people up and down elevators, or whether it's the car business like Subaru, or whether it's government, like the Ontario government, or whatever it might be, or sports organizations, at the end of the day, it's really about the effectiveness is all about people and all about leadership. And that really comes out. Great people with great leaders equals a great company. It really is that simple and that complex. Great people plus great leaders equals a great company. And that's really what this comes out. So how does one do that? Well, you know, it's interesting thinking about this. I mentioned earlier about, you know, we all went to York, or you might have gone to York for this whole concept of literacy and this idea of raising your literacy. And so one of the things that we're deeply passionate about is how to raise literacy. So let's think about some Canadian organizations and think about leadership. Let's think about 3 different organizations and where they're at today and how that relates to leaders. So if you think about these 3 organizations, RIM, Eaton's, and Tim Hortons, I want to just throw a couple thoughts in your observations of how leadership has impacted each of those organizations, or a comment about one of them. Just throw that in your question box here. How has leadership impacted RIM? How did leadership impact Eaton's? And how has leadership impacted Tim Hortons? Just throw a couple of comments if you want. And your observations, just as an extent, you might even have worked there, or may have been there. But how have those organizations been impacted through leadership? What are your thoughts or comments about that? Just throw that in the question box there. Yeah, if you think about Eaton's, why is Eaton's, which was the Amazon of the 19th century, the early 20th century, wasn't it? You could imagine this thing, a magic thing that you could order from thousands of items and it would be delivered to your desk, to your doorstep. That's Eaton's, right? So why is Eaton's no longer around? Why is that? They had all of the brand, they had the systems, they had the models, they had the people. Literally, at one point in the country, almost every family would have ordered something from them. RIM, the creator of really the, so I call it Eaton's Amazon 1.0, by the way. RIM is really the smartphone 1.0, isn't it? Right? RIM is really the smartphone. They're really the originator of this smarter phone. And again, why is RIM no longer a leader in that category? It went from literally the innovator and leader and the creator of the category, almost, you could suggest, to no longer being as relevant. Why is RIM that way? As somebody mentioned here, for Eaton's, unfortunately, they did not keep with the times. This is a function of poor leadership and especially vision. Absolutely. You know, if you think about it, all Eaton's needed to do was to translate their model online. Really, at the end of the day, it wasn't really that complex. But they didn't see it. And so you're right, it's a function of poor leadership and especially vision. And why is Tim Hortons consistently hit it out of the park? You know, I think about Tim Hortons, I think about the reality that Tim Hortons product is a very average product for the most part. Right? You don't go to Tim Hortons for your anniversary dinner. You don't go to Tim Hortons to, you know, really make a great impression on the first date. Right? Yeah, you go to Tim Hortons because you're on your way somewhere. You go to Tim Hortons because you need something quick and comfortable. But again, what I admire about Tim Hortons is their ability to evolve, adapt, change, and grow. And again, that's related to leadership, isn't it? It's all about leadership. So leadership, leadership, leadership. Now let me kind of narrow this down to something even smaller. So I speak across the country in different topics, and I was around career and leadership. I was in Victoria for a conference. It was about 2 years ago. And I picked up, and this gentleman picked me up in his taxi, this particular gentleman here you see. And we started chatting, and I said to him, what's your day going to be like? And he said, oh, we'll kind of see how it goes. You know, the day, it depends how lucky I am today. And then we had a nice conversation. He got me to my destination on time and quality, and his car was clean, and he was pleasant. I gave him a reasonable tip, and that was the end of it. And he kind of went on his way. I thought, oh, it's interesting, nice guy, did what he needed to do, and got me there. The second taxi driver I dealt with was in Halifax, and this gentleman picked me up at the airport. And on the way to the hotel, I was staying at the Westin, he said to me, do you mind if I ask your name? I said, no, not at all. And he said, oh, by the way, when are you flying back? And I said, well, I'm flying back on Friday. I said, oh, do you have a drive back on Friday? Now this is, remember, as on my way to the hotel after him picking me up at the airport. So I haven't even arrived in Halifax, and we're already discussing when I'm leaving. And then we went on this conversation. He said, well, would you like me to pick you up on Friday morning? And this is Tuesday, right? So 3 days later, I said, that would be great. Because what is our great stresses in traveling, I know for you and I, and it's for most people, is getting to the airport, not missing a flight, right? So especially early morning flights. So Mr. Land said, well, okay, great. So what time do you need to be picked up? And I said, I think around 5:30. And he said, okay, let me get he opened up his agenda, and he wrote my name in it. And he said, do you mind, Alan, if I ask you for your cell number? And I said, no. And so he took my cell number. And what you're seeing before you is the text that he sent to me on the night before, or the morning before. So Thursday morning at 7:30, he sent me a text saying, this is who I am. Do you remember who I am? I'm going to pick you up, and just confirming all the details. So this is another example of leadership. And this is an example of a commoditized category, right, such as a taxi driver. And I was impressed by thinking, leadership, it really is the difference. One taxi driver was getting me there, and the other taxi driver was leading me there. And really, at the end of the day, it's simple and as complex as that. Is, are you leading people? Are you finding opportunities to lead? And it can be in a very small way, or it can be in substantive way. So in a way, it's a small way. I just need to be picked up to get to the airport. That's really a small need, small problem, small opportunity. Now, what is interesting about Land the taxi driver is I noticed in his book that he already had 5 appointments for Friday already pre-booked. So if you think about it, it costs about $75 to go from central Halifax to the airport. So 3 days later, he's already got $300 worth of revenue booked for Friday morning. That's also practical benefits of leadership. You can have far more economic and return on your time, return on your investment, leading and managing well. And I just thought about that anyone can apply this stuff. This is not complex stuff that I'm talking about today. Leadership, really. So what does leading mean? What does it mean? Which is it? It means to cause to go with one, to be in first place. This great line that I love. Somebody shared this with me a long time ago, that people are silently looking to be led. People are silently looking to be led. That we're looking for leaders. When you think about Barack Obama, what his proposition was to people, at a time when he was elected, people were desperately looking to be led, and you saw that, and people will respond. And that's not a political statement; it's a reality. And we will see that this fall. And the city of Toronto saw that in this recent election. They didn't have a good leader, and they were desperately looking for a better leader. Right? The same thing federally when we see this in the fall. So to me, leadership is key. And it's a question of people following you, and we're looking for people to follow. Somebody is wanting to follow you, or people are following you, and you're kind of confusing them maybe. And this, again, happens at all levels. So why is leadership important? Well, let's think about it from practice. Well, there's 7 major things going on in the world of the economy right now, and it's affecting every single sector. So I mentioned earlier, we work across sectors. So we have corporate clients in the for-profit, not-for-profit, and public sector. And I've never seen a time when all of these elements have been impacting all of our clients. So let me share with you what they are. So we keep talking about recession, right? Well, I don't really see a recession going on. What I do see is a resettion, a real change in our world. So what are the 7 changes that I see, or I'm noticing? Well, one, economic volatility, that you're seeing things shift really, really quickly. And prime example of that, we just have to look at oil prices. Who would have predicted a year ago what oil prices would be? And who had predicted the impact on our economy? We have a very busy practice in Alberta. We work with a number of clients in Calgary and Edmonton and around that country, and we're dealing with the reality of a change in commodity prices. So real shift and the sudden shift in change in commodity prices can impact things, or prices in general. Globalization. The fact that we're seeing one that you can do work anywhere, anytime, and quite frankly, competition can come from anywhere. And you're starting to see that, by the way, if you look at the smartphone industry, that there's a new emerging Chinese competitor that is eating Samsung's lunch and coming in there. And so you're seeing these new emerging competitors coming, and the reality of being extremely well-educated workforce globally, and an innovative global economy, and an economy that is synchronized globally. So again, your competitors can come from anywhere. It's another reason why it's important, by the way, to be thinking about as a leader, are you getting some global experience? If I was to ask, say, one of my best piece of advice that I say to our clients is, in your organization, can you get some global projects? Can you get some global experience? Can you work on global projects, or can you get some expat experience? Particularly if you're working for large global organizations, the reality is you're not, if your goal is to become a leader in the executive suite, you will not get there unless you've done some expat work. You will not get there unless you've managed or led teams internationally or have been managing and leading divisions internationally. You simply will not get in the executive suite of any major global company at this point. If you're strictly working in Canada and you're working for a large global company, you're not going to get in the C-level suite of that company unless you have international experience. It's simply not going to happen. You don't know how to manage and lead a global company unless you've led and been in different cultures. So that's a change. Another change is the way we manage workforce. So the fact that we're using, on an ongoing basis, temporary employees, and seeing that happen, where people are coming in and out of organizations on a temporary basis. How many of you, put up your hands, have used or are you currently using temporary employees in your workforce right now that you're currently working with, or have used temporary employees? Essentially, the workforce has moved away from this sort of long-term relationship to where we're using far more times where we're using temporary workforce and managing them. So that's changing. The way we manage people, our relationship with people. Another change we're seeing is in the use of technology. So the fact of the smartphone, 24/7 nature, the fact that you need to be far more responsive and have tools and enable your workforce to work anywhere, anytime. So this relates to telecommuting, working from home, mobility of workforce, apps, all these kinds of things that are stripping out. So technology is stripping out layers. So the other thing we're starting to see is less and less of the middle management reality, and more either high level or low level. So a higher amount of service-based and a less amount of mid-level and a higher amount of higher level employees. So that's a shift in our workforce. So it's really stripping out the mid layers. Technology is. Another change is demographics. It's interesting that in the first time in our history, there's an interesting survey on will you retire by 2000 by 65, 66. And it's interesting in 2000, and this is a recent survey, about 55% of employees imagine themselves retiring, not retiring rather, in 2012. They imagine themselves continuing working. So again, we're seeing a globalized workforce. We're seeing a demographic workforce where you have mature workers and people working in contract, and you're seeing, again, multi-generational kinds of workforces. Again, as a leader, do you understand what it means to lead a millennial versus a mature employee? Do you understand what it means to lead a Gen X, a boomer versus a millennial versus, do you understand the nuances of that? Now, again, I don't want to label different areas, but you do have to pay attention to the context to different types of employees. So that's a shift. Another shift is new innovative players coming into your market space. So again, that's really what Eaton's and RIM really didn't understand, is they had new emerging entrances that really reshifted. So that changes things, or your ability to be an innovator and an adapter. I think resilience is a really important part of being a leader, but I also think being an innovator, being an entrepreneur. Are you entrepreneurial in your organization? Are you looking for opportunities to add and take more risk? It's sort of the paradox of our time that the risk takers are the ones that are going to be the leaders of the future. It will not be the safe players, because quite frankly, competition is eating lunches, organizations' lunches that are playing it safe. Even within public sector, that's happening. You're seeing that the new emerging leaders tend to be more risk-taking. So because they're seeing an emerging opportunities and having an entrepreneurial type of scenario. Another thing that's really playing out as a leader is, do you understand the value of brand? As consumers, we understand the value of brand because wherever we go, we live in a branded society. Now, not all of that's good, by the way, but I think Richard Branson in Virgin understood the value of brand. He understood that it isn't just good enough to have a great product or service, or even to be a great leader. It's really important how you package that. And do you understand branding principles and packaging principles and marketing principles, not just on behalf of your organization, but understand on behalf of yourself? And I'm going to share with you in a little bit about personal branding, what that can look like. But again, what does it mean as a leader to understand the value of brand and the value of position, the value of packaging? Do you better understand that, because again, even internally, when you're launching a new service or product internally or a new project, it's a lot about branding, a lot about messaging, a lot about how you package that thing, whatever that is, and also about verticalization, that you can't come out with general solutions anymore. We are no longer in the economy of generalities. We are in the economy of specifics, whatever category of service you're in. Again, within your group, within your department, within your realm, are you finding particular niches, or are you going after generalities? So I call that the app principle. You know, RIM thought of it as a killer app, but RIM would provide the platform of a killer app, and Apple and Google saw it as the million app universe, and that's the difference. So these things are creating interesting challenges in the workforce. You're starting to see much more stress in the workforce. You're seeing more people taking job tenures decreasing. You're seeing more people working only for money, and you're seeing this have greater impact on people's lives. You're even seeing it in health impacts. So kind of the stressful environment that we're in based upon those 7 major shifts in our world. That all of these things are coming to convergence, right? And the same thing if you're in the mid-level. How many of you are in the mid-level of your career? Would sort of say you're in the 35 to 55 year part? Put up your hands, those of you who are in the midpoint of your career. It's interesting, this is a very interesting survey or study by Harvard called Middle Sense. So instead of adolescence, use the term middle sense. And again, you're seeing these things come together. And in a sense, you're kind of the squeeze generation, that more people are experiencing burnout, more people are experiencing a new role, but people working lots more hours a week. So those are kind of the context to which all of us are leading and managing in. And by the way, that is impacting every single sector. You go for the not-for-profit sector, they're wrestling with these issues. Private sector in every single area, whether it's healthcare, media, technology, manufacturing, they're all wrestling with these issues. Every single sector is now synchronized. We live in a synchronized economy where all of those things are playing across, and there's disruptors in every single sector. I've never seen that. We've never lived in a time like that where every single sector is going through this concurrently. So what's interesting about this is, I call it sort of the smarty, or is it scary times or is it a smarty time? And I think what's interesting about the time we're in is you need to be smarter. You need to be smarter. You need to be clever. You need to be like that. Interesting enough, the second taxi driver who sent me the text was actually late 50s. He was actually a Vietnam. He'd come in in the 70s in the Vietnam boat. He'd been part of that Vietnamese immigration thing. So here's a man that's in his 50s, in late 50s, who is an innovator, embracing all these new things, thinking about how to do his business differently based on the changing landscape, using technology, exploring things in a more nuanced way, versus, interesting enough, the younger taxi driver who was not using any of those things. Interesting enough, he was sort of stuck in an old model, stuck in the time when you waited for people to show up and you flagged them down, right? And that old model is really limiting. So to me, what are some of the myths around that? Well, number one, there's a myth around there's a magic bullet. If I just take this program, if I just learn a 4-letter acronym or something, there'll be some magic bullet. Somebody asked this question, will the slide and audio be available afterwards? Yeah, I'm going to post it. We're going to post it to our CareerClass YouTube channel, and we'll post that and send you out a link for that. So not a problem. So is there a magic bullet? There isn't a magic bullet to what's going on. That's sort of the paradox of our times. There's no sort of magic answer, magic solution. Although there is one solution that I'll say that is a key solution, which I'll talk about in a little bit. That is, I think, the most important solution. That myth that you'll have a lot of pressure. It's interesting. I think if you manage and lead yourself, there is a lot of pressure around us, but you can be far more effective at leading and managing yourself and reduce that pressure, actually, based upon those changes. The other kind of myth is that invention is a new idea. People talk about this as new times, and it's true. There's a lot going on right now, and I've said that. But it's interesting, the word reinvent, by the way, actually, to look at the etymology of that word means to go back to that original place. So restart, redo, rethink, invent us. Let's go back to the original thing, right? So interesting enough about when people talk about reinventing themselves, or an organization talks about reinventing itself, and Apple's a great example of this. When Steve Jobs came back to reinvent Apple, one of the very first things he did with Apple, which is interesting, is he went back to the leadership team and to the employees and said, This is who we are. This is who Apple always has been. This is our identity, and this is what we do well. Now, how do we go back to that, but figure out a new way of doing it, right? That's reinvention. So if you're feeling stuck, your organization is feeling stuck, you're feeling stuck personally, one of the things I really encourage you to do is to go back to that place when things are working really, really well for you or your team or your organization. What were you doing? What was your role? What was your capacity? And figure out how to build from there. Because often when I used to think of reinvention, it was only until I explored this idea and explored the word, I realized, no, it's not about becoming something completely different. So it's not about RIM now starting to manufacture cars, right? It's not about Tim Hortons reinventing itself to become a burger joint, right? It's about doing what it does, and it's always done, but continually evolving and adapting that, right? So reinvention. Another sort of myth is you should know how to lead. How many of you have taken, put up your hands, those of you who have taken some sort of scuba diving or some sort of lessons around scuba diving or been scuba diving? Now let me say that if I said to you, I'm going to, for those that don't, so the other 80% that doesn't, or about 80, I guess only 9% have, let's say 9%, so 4 to 43 have taken some sort of leadership around scuba diving, right? So my 14-year-old, 15-year-old actually became certified as a diver, and he just, at 16, got certified as a pilot. He's in the midst of getting certified as a pilot. One of the myths we have is that we essentially know how to lead. And I think that's like essentially saying you should know how to fly or know how to scuba dive. I think that there's ways of learning. I think some people have a natural ability this way as a leader, have natural skill sets. But I also think we totally accept in, diving or scuba diving or whatever it might be, or being a CMA or being a doc, that you need to have some training or some development or some learning to help you do that. And I think that's really important because I think oftentimes in organizations we say, oh, you're a great salesperson. You're going to go lead the sales team. You're a great product manager. You're going to be director of product management. You kind of throw that person in there and say, go for it, go learn it. And again, I think not to say you shouldn't learn on a job, but I also think there are times when you want to do that. Another kind of myth around leadership is that leadership is a lonely place. Leadership is a lonely place. What I've discovered is one of the interesting things about effective leaders is they are not lonely. They're very, very good at building community around themselves and being smart around that. I don't think leadership needs, in fact, if you're a lonely leader, you're going to burn out. You're going to be incredibly in a risky spot. So when leaders say it's lonely at the top, that is not true at all. There is a lot of pressure at the top. It is a different role at the top. There are lots of things that are uniquely stretching with being at the top. But if you ever heard someone say lonely at the top, that person doesn't have good community around them. So one of the things you want to really be careful about is you have a personal board of directors. If you have a group around you that you can draw from and go and pitch ideas inside your organization and outside your organization, and also have different mentors in different ways, older mentors, younger mentors. I have a gentleman that I meet with about every couple of weeks, and he's in his 80s and has been very, very successful in the technology industry. And I run ideas behind him. I run both personal and professional things beside him, right? So willing lonely. Another myth is that it should be comfortable. I think good leaders are recognizing that if you're comfortable for too long, it's going to be dangerous. Another myth is that education will help. Listen, I think it's important to be well educated, and I think obviously York does a great job of that. It has some great programs. The other hand, though, is you cannot rely too heavily on education as the answer to being a good leader. I think there's times to look at different options around education and recognize that there's a role for education, but balance that. Another reality about leadership is that fears will motivate people. It's interesting you look at fear. Fear is a very good short-term motivator, but it's a very poor long-term motivator. Another myth is I don't have time. I wish I could spend more time learning how to be a more effective leader, but I'm having a hard time doing that. And one of the things I present to you is something that, how many of you personally now have some sort of an exercise regimen? What have you, hands, those of you that on a somewhat ongoing basis have some sort of a discipline around personal exercise? Right, so here's my observation. We have time and energy for something that we value. And one of the things that I recommend as a leader is put aside 10 minutes a day for leadership development. And I call this a 10-minute principle. Just 10 minutes a day, and it could be reading an article, grabbing a quick coffee with somebody, whatever it might be. 10 minutes a day will lead to an hour a week, which leads to about 50 hours a year of leadership development in just 10 minutes a day. And it's about staying in career shape and thinking about that. So 10 minutes a day is important. So another reality is around leaders is leaders will follow the rules. Right? And what I've also observed is that most good leaders are not good rule followers. Now, I don't mean ethical or moral rules. I'm not saying about that. What I'm saying is I think good leaders know when to follow the rules and when not to follow the rules, and how to be, and that's innovators. You know, it's interesting. You'll see this, by the way, where I know this plays out. To give you a specific example, when the TDC says it's going to work to rule, what it's saying is that all of our employees are going to follow the rules all day long. And when an organization does that, what happens? It implodes. It implodes. When we work to rule, quote, quote, we have got all kinds of problems with that, right? So to me, again, as a leader, you know, it's very interesting. There's a really interesting, the A380, my son is training to be a pilot. He's just applied for a program. He's got accepted for your commercial aviation program. And I sent him this article, this video about an Airbus, a Qantas airline, an Air 380 that the engine blew on it. And this was early in the Air 380 program. The captain of that airline, that was the captain of the air in that flight, was a captain with a lot of experience. And when this incident occurred, he was supposed to follow a certain set of rules. And about a third of the way through the rule following, he realized he intuitively sensed he needed to skip over 2 rules. And there were a couple other people in the cockpit kind of walking him through, and he knew that they were going to be listening for him to follow the rules. And what he did is he skipped over that by distracting them. And what's interesting is if he would have followed the rules in that scenario, that Air 380 would have gone down, and all 400 people would have died. And he had this instinct that he needed to skip the rule, and that's a great example of, to me, of literally leadership. You know, so another scenario that I'll say is that some people think that leaders are lucky, you know, that some leaders are luckier than others, and this is a really interesting thing you look at. The Luck Factor by Dr. Richard Wiseman has some really good insight around luck, and if you're interested in that, he looks at luck. And when leaders say, "Oh, I'm just lucky. I had a lucky break. I had a lucky something lucky happened to me." In fact, you look at the research, the scientific research around luck is around behavior and attitude in dealing with stress. So, what is the number one thing that a leader does really, really well? You know, often people will come in and be looking to deal with an issue, a project, a change in something. Great leaders understand it's not about the how, the what, the when, the where, or the who. It's about the why. You know, I think, you know, when you can get to a why in a conversation is the most powerful conversation you're going to have as a leader. So in a sense, if you think about the taxi driver that understood that, why would I want to book my return pickup back on a Tuesday when I'm coming back Friday? Because he instinctively knew that most people are always thinking about leaving and will they miss a flight, or getting that organized, or being on top of things. And the stress that it sort of burns a little bit, right? So that's a small example of that, of why. And so when you're dealing with change and dealing with all of these factors you're dealing with, one of the things when you're trying to get people to move forward, and when you're trying to get yourself to move forward, are you getting to the why? Simon Sinek has a great book around this, and it's a great TED Talk. You've probably seen it, Start With Why, right? Because if you don't get to the why of the matter, you will not get to the change of the matter. Let me say that again. If you don't get to the why of the matter, you won't get to the change of the matter. Change will not happen without discovering the why. You can talk to somebody about anyone on your team about a behavioral change or something in their life they want to change. But if you can't explore their why, and it's not just the why, it's your why or their why. One of my clients is an executive in the tech sector, and she had smoked for a number of years. Now, why should somebody quit smoking? Why should somebody quit smoking? Well, because of cancer, right? Or because of money, or because of smell, or whatever. Well, why do you think she quit smoking? Well, it's none of that. It's because she realized that smoking was controlling her schedule, and that's, so to me, the why. The why is really important. The next thing about the why is about the who. So who does matter? And one of the things interesting about good leaders have a sensibility of style. And I call this the principle that If you look at these three leaders, you look at Chris Hadfield, Don Cherry, and Stephen Harper, rather. Each of them are leaders unto their own way. What's interesting about all three of them, putting aside your political views or your thoughts about each one of them, we would all agree that they are very, very good at what they do in different ways, and that we know very clearly of what to expect with them. We may not like them or agree with them or support them, but what is interesting about all three of these, Chris Hadfield, Don Cherry, and Stephen Harper, is the reason they've been so successful is they have a clear sense of who they are and what they do well and what they're about. And they're very rigorous about how they manage and protect it. You know what's interesting? There's a Gallup poll of a strength finders poll, and they looked at 1.2 million professionals. And they looked at it at 60 countries and 99 companies. And one of the things they explored with that is did you know your strengths? Now, what percentage of people do you think, just throw your answer in the question box here, knew their strengths with preciseness? What do you think it was with these 1.2 million people? What was the percentage of people who really had a clear sense of their strengths? What do you think it was? Throw your answers in here. 15, we have 60, less than 50%, 42, 72, 48. Yeah, it was actually 17%, 17. So one of the really important things you can do for yourself is, do you have a clear sense of your leadership capacity, your unique strengths? And one of the great dangers it is as a leader is to try to be somebody else's leadership style. You know, I've never seen Don Cherry dressed like Ron McLean. I've never seen Ron McLean dressed like Don Cherry. I've never seen sort of Stephen Harper not look sort of stiff and formal. And I've never sort of seen Chris Hadfield have sort of this kind of real human joy to him, right? That each one of them brings that to them. And you have a sensibility of that they know who they are, and they're consistent in how they navigate and grow within it. They're comfortable in their own skin. And I think that's one of the things you need to be really comfortable with in your own skin, not trying to be like your boss or your boss's boss or whatever it is. I'm not saying that you can't adapt your style from time to time, but I think you have to understand your core style. And that's really about what we call your brand. And what is your brand as a leader? If you were to say, you were to describe in 3 words your leadership style, and throw that in the box, in the question box. What would you say 3 words you would describe your leadership style? 3 words that would describe you as a leader. What would be the top 3 words with preciseness that would describe you as a leader? You know, it's interesting when you think of Chris Hadfield or Stephen Harper or Don Cherry, you in less than a minute can describe all of those quickly just like that. And how would you define your own leadership style in 3 words? Who you are as a leader, right? What does that look like? And that's really about branding. There's also about styles of leadership. So if you look at sort of research around styles, well, there's 4 kind of core styles around leadership. Decisive style, flexible style, hierarchical style, integrative style. And so what you find is that different leaders also have a different kind of style of the way that they deal. So you could think about this as far as about leaders in general. So decisive style, so it's somebody who gets information, wants a core of action and wants to get on with it, right? You have flexible style, little information but many options, right? You have hierarchical style. You tend to see this, by the way, in public sector and in organizations or large bureaucracies where there's reams of data but one course of action. Right? And then there's sort of what I think is the style you want to be pursuing longer term as far as where the world is going. And you see this, by the way, you see this in Apple and in Google and in Telsa and other great organizations that are, and Tim Hortons, the integrated style, where they get various data and group of options, and they, through creativity, they are able to come up with solutions. So again, if you look at taxi driver number 1, was a decisive style, little information, one course of action. Either you need me or you don't need me. A hierarchical taxi driver would have overwhelmed me with options, and I would have got caught up in bureaucracy, and I probably would have had to sign off an NDA and something. Right? But the taxi driver, Lan, he was able to give me an integrative style, kind of integrating a bunch of different ways to connect with me, right? So too, that's really important as you think about yourself. Which of those would you describe where you are now? And where would you see yourself going as far as the leadership capacity style. So not necessarily your style as a person, but the leadership style you use. And integrative is really the way to go. So let me show you some kind of interesting research around this area. And this is from a Canadian survey by Global Knowledge. And they looked at what is the biggest challenges for businesses to come and organizations to come in the coming years. And the top business challenges is around management and leadership capacity, talent succession and recruitment, followed by financial competitive pressures, and business process improvement. What I find interesting about this survey is that the #1 issue around organizations today is around people. The top 3 are all people related, all around people as leaders. That's the biggest challenge. What might have to change in roles? What the question is asked is, what is it that would have to change to deal with this new reality? So the things that we're dealing with are things I mentioned at the very front end. Well, 1 was a new perspective and new areas of expertise, and 2, a transformation in thinking and behavior. You know, it's interesting, one of my clients travels quite a bit, and one of the things that this particular person, what she does is whenever she went to the airport, she would go to the magazine section, and she would always buy a magazine from something she'd never read before. So she picked up, you know, hunting to whatever. And whenever she traveled, she'd always attempt to buy a magazine about a topic she'd never read before. And what I found interesting about that is she was always looking to disrupt her ways rather than going to the 4 major magazines that she always read, right? She was always looking for new perspective and looking for areas to do that. And so that's, by the way, it's what's neat about having you know, having a broad select group of people, your personal board of directors that are different and variant and come from different industries. That's what's interesting about, you know, are you only reading within your category, or are you looking outside of your business to find innovative solutions? And that's what you see. The innovators often come outside of the category. A lot of innovators come outside the category. So think of Telsa, you know, think of what they've done in the car business. Again, they don't come from within the sector. The entrepreneurs came from outside the sector, and then they integrated some people within the sector that were risk takers. So it's an example of that, right? So innovation often happens outside the sector when you look outside of your room. So where are you getting new perspectives? Where have you challenged yourself to see something differently? You know, this last fall, I took a course at Second City, and to me that was interesting to think about a new area of thinking, a new way of coming up, and new expertise. So that's interesting. So now, what would have the most influence on individual organization performance now and in the future? Well, no surprise, the #1 thing that most organizations felt was lacking, could be worked on, was communication. It's interesting, we were working with one of our organizations we've been coaching, and I got an email from one of the managers this morning and said, yeah, finally we're really seeing communication increase between different parts of the organization. We're really starting to see, they had a particular client issue occur, and you know, there was just really good communication. Whereas before what was happening is that information would have been isolated between finance and marketing and engineering, and now what they're starting to see that people are cross-sharing information, and there's a particular problem with the client, and because of the 3 parts of the organization working together, the comment from the leader was saying, you know, this is what it means to be a well-working organization. So communication. So what have you done to increase your communication? How many of you have worked at that? You know, even there's some great, you know, stuff out there about, you know, that's why TED Talks have been interesting, because TED Talks are really about, and there's really now TED Talks about how to put a TED Talk together, because really TED Talk is a great example of how to digest a lot of information fairly quickly. And then there's execution, decision making, coaching, mentoring, people development. A great leader is a great coach. And really, people development, if you look at the fundamental reality of mentoring and people development, is all about communication, how we communicate issues, how we get to issues, what does that look like, right? So that's key. So really, where do you look at the gaps? The biggest gaps lie in communication, coaching, mentoring, people development, and knowledge transfer and sharing. Right? That's sort of where the big gaps lie. So hence why we're seeing that happen. Right? So what are the kind of learning experiences would lead to the greatest impact on improving senior leader performance? Well, really, reframing or reshaping underlying patterns of thinking behavior. So remember I mentioned earlier about the why. See, if you try to reframe something, just the data around something, you're not going to change the way somebody thinks about it often. You have to get to why do they think the data means what it means? And what is it that there's limiting beliefs around that data or what they're viewing about that data? So this is to me why the why is such a powerful thing, because that really does get to the core of the issue. And then embracing the unknown in order to integrate new ideas. And it's the same thing at the senior level and the junior level. So we look across them. High-performing organizations, this is interesting. Consider technology, B2B, their future challenge. They place higher emphasis on work-life balance, and they place higher emphasis on coaching, mentoring people to balance. Let me say something about work-life balance. I don't like the word like work-life balance because I don't think it's a really achievable goal. What I think it's important today is to look as a leader and for yourself at work-life integration. And there's a really good book called Why Work Sucks and How to Fix It. It's a very simple thing. What they discovered in research is that they gave organizations or people within organizations more control over when they did and how they did it. So some people are good at coming in the morning and working late. Some people are better at scenarios that they would do better work. Right? So this is interesting about that, thinking about transformation and thinking about work-life balance, thinking about technology. Also important why you want to be thinking about your own technology. So what are some things here, and then we're going to go some Q&A. Well, as a leader, one of the things I suggest is trust your intuition. Always start with what you know. Remember I was mentioning to you about that Air 380 captain? It was what he knew. He didn't just get locked into the context of what was going on. It was what he knew, right? What he sensed. I think leaders, interesting enough, took this picture just outside of Kingston on an island there. And this farmer saw, one farmer sees hay, another farmer sees hydro. So there's a large wind farm on that piece of property. And again, great leaders see opportunity or they see things differently, and that's what's neat. Another thing I think a great leader does, and this is what I saw in my taxi driver number 2, is Serena Fimes is one of the great 20th century archaeologists. And in the early 20th century, they were doing a dig, and they'd been there for a while. They hadn't been doing a dig. They'd been looking for a while, and they'd overheard the spies saying, they're just looking, they're not digging. And he was worried that they were going to lose their permits when he heard that. So he said to his team, we need to start digging right away. And it's interesting, within 24 hours, they found one of the greatest archaeological finds in the 20th century. And I think that one of the good things about leaders is they dig. They find opportunity. That taxi driver who when I was in his car, was digging, right? Was looking for stuff, looking for his next opportunity right where he was. He wasn't going to wait till I got out of the car and text me later. Another important thing we talked about, as a leader, your network is your net worth. It's interesting as a leader, often I'll find great leaders will be cross-networked really well. In fact, there's new data coming out around human resources where it tracks on your tag, basically on your employee tag when you move around the organization. It used to be that you could just use that for inbound and outbound, so sort of map tracking when you arrived and when you left, or scanning in the door or scanning out, right? Well, now you're able to measure many multiple data points with new human resource tracking system, which has a little bit Big Brother-like, I can see. But this particular organization looked at high-performing organizations, high-performing individuals, and low-performing individuals. And one of the things they observed is high-performing individuals were networked in multiple parts of their groups. They weren't just networked within IT or finance or marketing or whatever their group was. High-performing individuals tended to spend more time away from their desks and less time in front of their desks. And more time communicating. There are lots of different data points around that, but what's interesting is that your network is your network. You're not going to get things done or explore ideas or find out problems by sitting at your desk. Another thing about is to think globally and drink locally. In our Calgary office, I was there in Big Rock, based out of there, and I saw this ad for it. I thought that's really true. That smart leaders look at the big picture, but then figure out, what do I do here and now? Think about that. I mentioned this earlier about packaging. There's I don't know how many of you are in Ottawa, but there's a particular English taxi cab in Ottawa. And again, this whole concept of packaging, distinctive, differentiating yourself in a commoditized. Pretty well every category is moving towards commoditization. So what you have to figure out within your category, within your industry, within your sector, within your group, is how to not become a commodity. how to not commoditize or allow yourself to be commodity, and how to differentiate yourself and present a different kind of solution within that category that's unique to you. I think smart leaders also are optimistic by nature. They're looking for the opportunity. They're always going to look for solutions versus the bad stuff. I love this sign. Dear optimist, pessimist, and realist, while you guys are busy arguing, I drank the water. Opportunist. Love that sign. How many of you were a Scout or a Brownie growing up? Put up your hands, those of you that were Scout or Brownie growing up. Put up your hands. Or involved in Scouts and Brownies. It's interesting, they're one of our corporate clients. We do a lot of work with them. Share with me one or two things you learned as a Brownie or a Scout growing up. What are one or two things you learned as a Scout or Brownie growing up? Have to be prepared, absolutely. Yeah. What you learn as a Prouder, it's going to be, a team. Training, yeah, absolutely. Getting trained, for sure. Other things as a Scout or Brownie. Yeah, so to me, do your best how to start a fire. Do your best. Yeah, do your best. You know, the thing that I really take away, and often people say share, and somebody just shared this here, is be prepared. Again, I think what smart leaders are is they're prepared for stuff ahead. They're prepared for where things are heading next. Like they do really, really good preparation, right? And also I think what I learned from there is this idea of knowledge transfer from generation, right? Because if you think about the generations now of people in Scouts and Cubs, right? Knowledge transfer, preparation. I think another thing of a good manager is very, very good at it is a good leader is very good at presenting to you or to people that work for them the truth. I can think of a classic example I had early in my career where somebody said to me, Alan, you are great in this area, but I just want to point something out. And you're not going to like me when I hear it, but you're never going to forget this conversation. And it's true, I have never forgotten that conversation. And I admire Pat having the courage to say, we think highly of you, you're doing great work for us, but we need to get your shit together in this scenario. And you need to do better in this particular area. You need to start working on that. And I think a great leader, a great manager is not afraid to tell the truth, but do it in a way that is smart and compelling and wise, right? So I think that's really important. I also think one other thing, I think a manager knows when's enough and when's not enough, both themselves and for their team. I think that's one of the challenges we live in today. There's so much demand, so many pressure around us. We have to figure that out. And that also creates another principle that I'd like to suggest is, how many of you put up your hands who would agree with this statement? You need to give work 100%. That you think your work needs to get 100% of you. That you need to come in every day and give 100%. Put up your hands, those of you who would agree with that statement. You need to get 100% of your work, right? Again. So if you give 100% of your work, of yourself to work that day, what do you have left when you go home? What do you got left when you go home? You don't got nothing left when you go home. My advice to leaders, and we do a lot of coaching leaders, I mentioned, is give your best to work. Don't give your all. Give your best to work, but don't give your all. Because you need other places to give your best, at home and different areas of life. It also creates opportunity, energy, and time and space for other areas of your life. And that leads to burnout. You cannot give your all to work and go home and have anything left. And that's where you see impacts on health, relationships, all addiction issues, etc., because you just can't do it. It just will burn you out. Tiger Woods, by the way, I think that was one of the issues that he struggled with. That's why his life went off the tracks earlier, and I think he's recovered most of it, I think. But the point, I think, with Tiger Woods is a prime example of, and you see this as very, very high-performing individuals, that their work becomes all-consuming, and they just don't have anything, space or energy left for other parts of their life, and it usually shows up in dysfunction of some format, addiction issues of some format, right? Or burnout. So really important to that. Another kind of couple quick things to think about is, as a leader, give them what you want, not what you think they want. Again, my niece was presenting to her dog Lily, water. Now the problem is Lily had spent the whole day in the lake. So when she's presenting water to Lily, Lily's not interested. Now if she was presenting dog food to Lily, Lily would be very interested. So as a leader, it's really important to know what to present and when to present and why to present it in general. So let me ask you a question here. What do you think there is a car wash or pet spa on this piece of property now? I mean, raise your hands those of you that think there is something on this piece of property now that this sign is on. Do you think there's just something on there? Correct, there's nothing on there. The reason there's nothing on there is because of the one word maybe. Exactly, maybe. Maybe. Here's my advice, another piece of advice, is don't allow people that you work with and lead to have maybe conversations. And we know, usually they know it was overt. That's why I laughed at the sign, and I didn't Photoshop it. It's a real live sign, and by the way, there's a for sale sign on that piece of property now. Why I laughed is because it was so honest. Like, I haven't seen you know, which basically, if you're a team, if you as a leader drop in maybe into anything you do, and say, we're going to do this, and then suddenly you drop in maybe in some way that you're behaving. Usually you don't say maybe. You usually say it in other ways, right, in your behavior. Either be committed to something or don't be committed to something. Same thing with people that report to you. Don't allow them to have maybe conversations. Either flush out what the resistance is or why they wouldn't do it or what your thinking is, because you won't get anywhere. Maybe. So I left. So don't allow people to have maybe conversations. I love what this leadership says. You manage things, you lead people. You manage things, you lead people. And that's really, really important. You cannot manage people. People are not assets. They're not resources. They're not talent. They're not capital. People are people. And so it's really important to distinguish between managing things and leading people. And that's a really, really smart thing to understand. What are the things that you need to manage? So in the taxi driver's example, managing scheduling, managing a text to me, right? But he was leading me. He wasn't managing me. Because if he was managing me, I would have backed away. Excuse me, I would have backed away. Right? Think about that. So I'm going to wrap up here. Went a little bit over. I apologize. My timing was a bit off, so I apologize about that. So what is one takeaway from today that you're going to implement? What is one idea from today that you think would help you to be a better leader, would make your work better? Would you mind sharing that with me in the box? What is one or an idea today that you think can help you be a more effective leader? What is that? What's one thing from today that you think you could do differently and better as a leader that you would like to work on? Yeah, somebody mentioned here, I love the quote, give your best to work, but don't give your all. Okay, awesome. And feel free, by the way, if people want to tweet any of these, look for the why. Okay, great. Give people what they want, not what you think they want. Yeah, that's such a, we get so caught up in our own sort of beliefs around things, right? And it's so obvious when I saw that talk. Yeah, I've done that so many times. Right? I really like the giving your best, but not giving your all. Okay, great. Looking for opportunities, getting commitment. Yeah, for sure. If you don't get commitment, and why? And those are both related to, if you get to the why, then you'll get a commitment. Or at least you'll know some way to manage to get to commitment. That's what I love about the why question is it fleshes out like hidden objectives or things that people are unsure about. That's what the why is very powerful. And most people that are managing people will talk about who, where, what, and when. Leaders will talk about why. Let me say that again. Managers will talk about who, what, where, and when. Leaders will talk about why. Now, eventually, leaders need to talk about the others, but the core of the conversation is a why conversation, not a who, where, what, when. Managing things and lead people. Yeah, and this mention here about the concept of get digging. Yeah, that's a real. I call that the Microsoft principle. Apple's done a better job of that, by the way, because Apple figured out you have to actually deliver a product, a better quality product out the gate than Microsoft, because the market shift. But when when it had a monopoly, it could do that. But the thing I admire about Microsoft is the 1.0 principle. It would come out with something, get it out, and they'd make it better, right? Now, Apple came out with the 2.0 principle. They came out with the product in the second level, so it wasn't as frustrating to the user, right? That was one of the smart things they figured out but you can always make it better, and you can always work on it. How can we help you? I'll leave this open for questions or comments. We have a partnership with York, where you get a special discount. So if your organization, if you're looking for support, we work with a number of organizations in OD and training and coaching and transition, so we'd be happy to talk to you about that. Also, if you yourself are looking at transition support, we work with individuals as well. So we have a number of individual clients who are saying, I'm trying to do some career planning, or I would like to get some leadership coaching, or I have some training budget that I can select to a vendor. We'd love to talk to you about that. Then we can do that. And you get a discount. You get a special pricing as an alumnus. So I'm recognizing it's the end of the hour, and I want to thank you. So a couple of things I'll just mention. I sent this to you earlier, but I'll just send it to you again so you have it. Feel free to connect with me that way. If you're not connect with me that way. Also on our site, we have a number. Feel free to like our Facebook page. We have a Facebook page, also on LinkedIn. We have a LinkedIn page as well. And on our site, CareerJoy, we have lots of different elements there to download and guide and kind of describe in more detail some of the products we have, services we have, as well as we have a newsletter we put together every week. So what I'll do is I'll add you guys to that newsletter. If you don't want to stay on it, just unsubscribe. But joining us today, we'll add you to the newsletter, which will kind of share with you best practices and different things around work that we're thinking about. We put together a Monday newsletter for career, and Friday is about our leadership. So on Fridays and Mondays, we put together a leadership idea. So feel free to unsubscribe if you don't like it or just deselect it. Happy to do that. Terrific. Any other questions or comments about leadership in general, or the economy, or careers, or things you're thinking about? Somebody asked a question, where are you guys based? So we're based right across the country. We have offices, 12 offices, from Halifax to Vancouver, so we're right across the country, Western Ontario, 3 offices in Toronto, Halifax, Montreal, Ottawa, Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, and Vancouver. And, yes, we do work both face-to-face or workshop-oriented or via Skype. So if you're not, you don't have to be in those offices to do the work. It's all one-on-one, or it's workshop-oriented, depending on what we're doing with you. And the question is sectors we work in. We work in a number of different sectors. We have, like I said, for-profit, not-for-profit government, and a number of different verticals. So we've got, within our team, we've got a great team of coaches, and they come from disparate backgrounds. So some have been in the legal industry, some have been in healthcare, some have been in technology, some have been in media, some have been in government, some are working in universities. So we've got a really good group on our team that are able to work with you from different angles and different ideas around this, which is great. Yeah, okay, good. All right, well, I'm cognizant of the time. We're at the hour, so I'm going to, if we can help you at all, feel free to reach out to me. As I mentioned, we send that all to you. And if you know others that are struggling with this question or looking for support in their career development, feel free to connect with us and our team. Happy to help you. We also offer a complimentary coaching conversation around this. So, all right, well, have a great day, everyone. Cheerio, and hope you found this helpful. And if you would let others people, you can let them know on Twitter or Facebook, other ways about us. Feel free to do that. Have a terrific day, everyone. Bye now.